8. And I was so impressed with him because of his integrity. He knows more about essential oil chemistry and essential oil science than anyone in the world. How is that? He has been dedicated to this particular science for 20 years. I watched him walk away from money for integrity and principle. This is the man that oversees the quality of dōTERRA's oils, and I am so grateful because we would not be the company we are today. We would not have the quality oils we have today. We would not have the partnerships with growers that we have today if it wasn't for this man. So give him a warm welcome and let him take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Wow, you guys have grown up. The last time I was here in 2012, I believe you had 7,500 people. So this is quite an improvement. So you ready to go to school? Okay. I'm going to title this lesson Adulteration 101. And you're going to learn some things about essential oil chemistry that most people will never learn or until now, because companies generally don't like to share these kind of secrets. So I've classified 4 basic types of adulteration that occur in the essential oil industry. And I'm going to start talking about the simplest type, which I call type 1, or non-volatile addition. And this used to occur more often than it does today, but it still occurs in mainly in the heavier oils like sandalwood oil and things like that. It's basically where you take a heavy carrier or just a synthetic, what we call a perfume diluent, and add it to an essential oil. Obviously, this would decrease the cost of the oil. And because essential oils are volatile, we can analyze them by GCMS. When you put something in an essential oil that's not volatile, it will not come off the GC column. So someone who's maybe not very experienced in essential oil analysis could potentially analyze an essential oil that had been cut with a non-volatile, run it on the GC, and it looks completely normal. But in reality, he's not seeing the full picture of what's in that liquid, because maybe half of it may not even be coming off the column. This is not as common. It's basically the crudest form of adulteration, and it doesn't take much skill unless you want to do it in a way that will also fool someone who is going to be doing optical rotation, refractive index, specific gravity, because usually when they adulterate an essential oil with a carrier that's non-volatile, it will throw these physical constants off. But if the person doing the adulteration is skilled enough, he could pick the non-volatile component such that it will not change the expected range of the optical rotation, the specific gravity, and optical rotation. Refractive index, sorry. So, how do you tell? Good question. Here's a sample of sandalwood that's been adulterated. Now, I haven't listed the components that are there, but the largest peak there would be alpha xantholol. The second largest peak would be beta xantholol. Every peak that would show up there and to be printed out on the printout would be exactly as we would expect for a good Indian sandalwood. This is a sample of pure sandalwood. So you can see it looks pretty much the same. But pay attention to the little number that's up in the corner, the left-hand corner of that chromatogram. I don't know if you can see it. On this sample, oh wait, I'm sorry, this one is I can't really see it this far away. But if the little number up in the corner is 11,000, is that right? Okay. That is the adulterated sample. Now go back one. There you go. Now look up in the corner and look at that number. And you should see 21,000, or 21 million, sorry. The other one was 11 million. This is 21 million and change. And that number is what's called the TIC, or the total ion chromatogram. If the sample, if you're doing a series of analysis and it's the same oil, same species, you would expect that number to be the same throughout your series of different samples that you're looking at. When it's drastically cut, that tells you there's a large percentage of that liquid that is not coming off the GC column. And it's amazing how many analysts overlook that number. You can do some further tests to confirm your suspicions by putting an internal standard in the sample and then seeing if that internal standard measures up to what you expected, and that would confirm your suspicion. And this is what we do in these situations to be able to tell. So this is not one that's really ever going to get past us. But it does get past a few other, some different labs around the country. The next type, which is getting a little more advanced, the next type of adulteration is what I call type 2, or a secondary species addition. Really, this should say secondary species or natural isolate from a secondary species, because both of these are commonly used. A perfect case in point would be cassia and cinnamon bark, that system. It's basically, you're taking a less expensive species which produces a similar oil, chemically speaking, and using it to blend in a more expensive oil. So cinnamon bark is about 3 times or more the price of cassia. And it's real tempting for people who know a little bit, just a little bit, enough to be dangerous about the chemistry of essential oils, to say, oh, well, cassia, cinnamon bark, they smell really close. We can blend these together, no one's going to find out. The problem with that is if you know the chemistry of these oils, even though, yes, cassia and cinnamon bark both have their main component is cinnamic aldehyde, which is the largest peak you see there. That's for cassia. Cassia has 2 dead giveaways when it's used to adulterate cinnamon bark. The smaller peak you see there is a component called coumarin, which can be in too high of a percentage a carcinogen. It's not a good component. The second component there is one called orthomethoxycinnamic aldehyde. You'll remember that one, right? Okay. But that component is typically in cassia at anywhere from, I'd say, 6 to 12%. If you look at cinnamon bark, you see there's no coumarin. And then if orthomethoxycinnamic aldehyde is present, it's only at a tiny fraction of a percent. Sometimes it's not there at all. In this case, this is a good cinnamon bark. It's only there at 0.27%. So what happens when you blend in the cassia into the cinnamon bark? You see this. This is an actual sample that's actually on the market right now, where you can clearly see it has about almost 1% of coumarin and about almost 10% of orthomethoxycinnamic aldehyde. Clear, unquestionable adulteration of cassia into the cinnamon bark at probably close to 50%. Driving the cost of that oil dramatically down and being passed off as pure cinnamon bark oil. You're not going to learn this in any kind of trade show anywhere. Now, the other half of this type 2 adulteration, secondary species or natural isolate addition, is the case where we have, with the adulteration occurs when instead of the whole oil from another species is added, a very pure single component that's isolated from another essential oil. It's something that's available cheaply, but it's still natural, will test natural in all of its respective tests. And that thing is pulled out, isolated, and then added to an essential oil. Good example of this is with frankincense oil. Very important oil to all of us. And frankincense always has a good amount of alpha-pinene in it. And so it's very tempting to take alpha-pinene that would be isolated from, say, a turpentine source, a natural product formed from various different conifer trees, and take that cheap alpha-pinene, which normally sells for less than $10 a kilo, and dump it into your frankincense oil. Again, this is a commercial sample from another source that we will not name that has 80% alpha-pinene, which is extremely high. When you look at a sample of the dōTERRA frankincense, we see it's much more complex if you look at the other peaks there relative to the main peak, which is alpha-pinene. And alpha-pinene typically will range 40 to 50%, let's say. And this is where it should be for a good quality frankincense. This brings us to the third type of adulteration, and that's what I call synthetic chemical addition. Now, this is a little bit different than the previous type where we take a natural isolate from an essential oil. This is where we take, or the compounder would take a petrochemical derived synthetic component and add it to the essential oil. Now, most molecules in essential oils have what we call enantiomers. And if you've heard me talk before, you've probably seen this slide before where I try to briefly explain what an enantiomer is and what a chiral carbon atom is. Basically, most essential oil molecules are produced. There's two forms. There's the left-hand form and the right-hand form. And these are called enantiomers. But if you hold the structures of the different enantiomers up to one another, you'd see that there are mirror images. And even though they look the same on the surface, when you try to superimpose one on the other, just as you can't superimpose your right hand on your left hand, they're actually different molecules. Perfect example of this is linalool. You have the L and the D forms of linalool, the plus and the minus. Or plus would be the D form, minus would be the L form. And when you make an aroma chemical from a petrochemical derivative, and you use that as your starting precursor, normally what happens is you get a 50-50 mixture of these two forms of that molecule. But nature is not like that. When plants make molecules, they tend to favor one enantiomer over the other. In the case of linalool, it depends on the plant, but always one form dominates over the other. In lavender, for example, L-linalool would be maybe, say, 95% over the D form. In coriander, on the other hand, we see that D is the main form. This GCMS shows an adulterated coriander sample. We're having a big problem right now with seeing a lot of coriander that's adulterated with linalool from synthetic or other sources. And the way we know that that's happening, that graph there looks exactly like it should because it's a normal GC. The way we can tell is if we run it on a chiral GC column, which most labs do not have. Now that graph there shows, after we run the coriander on the chiral column, those two large peaks are both linalool. Now we've split them apart, which we couldn't see on a normal GC column before, and most people would not see. Now we can get an idea of the percentage of L versus D. In true coriander oil, that ratio should be about 84 to 16 D to L. In this sample, again from a competitor, we see it's about 70-30. This changes the optic rotation, gets it out of spec, but we can also prove, it's concrete proof, that when this ratio is thrown off, that some linalool from another source has been added to jack up that L, basically double where it should be. And so we know that there's been a significant cut with something else to get the cost down. Now, you don't always have a situation where we can go to chiral GC analysis. A good example of that was with thyme oil. This graph of thyme is showing a sample that looks good analytically, but it's actually cut with about 40% synthetic thyme oil. Like I said, you can't use chiral GC to tell this. And the reason is thymol is one of the few molecules that is found in essential oils that has no chirality, has no enantiomer. So it doesn't matter if it's made from a synthetic source or a natural source, there's only one thymol, there's no L and D form. And it's available in very high purity. This is a GC of a commercial sample of a very cheap synthetic thymol. And you see it's just one peak. I mean, we searched the baseline, and this product is as pure as you can get. There's other things in there that are unidentifiable. There's always some impurity in everything. But it's 99.99% pure, and you can't really tag anything else in there that's going to give it away as being from a synthetic source. So it's very easy to add this to a thyme oil, cut your cost, and have it look natural on the GC. So what do you do in this case? Well, this is an example of where we'd have to send the sample out to the University of Georgia, Dr. Culp there, who does carbon-14 testing. Now what carbon-14 isotope test does is it can tell when a molecule is from a petrochemical source versus a plant source. Because when things come from plants that are alive, they're intaking carbon-14 at a constant rate until the moment they die. So that ratio is going to be expected to be at a certain point when we do the carbon-14 isotope test versus a petrochemical derived component that comes from something that's died many, many, many years ago. And so when they do the carbon-14 and they see that the time, the result, what we expect is a number of 14. Now, when that result comes out 14, we know it's from a naturally derived source. This thyme oil came out to be 8.93, which indicates, if you can read the small text there, about a 37% adulteration with petrochemical derived material. No question, no refuting, done deal. The final type of adulteration is what I like to call synthetic chemical from natural precursor addition. Now this is where everything is heading, and this is where things get the trickiest and where it requires the most expertise and the most experience to be able to tell this type of adulteration. Basically, we're adding a synthetic component that's made from a precursor that came from natural plant material. Now that sounds complicated, but it's really not that. You don't need to know the details of the processes that go on, but I've put one up here. In the case of spearmint oil, for example, carvone, L-carvone in particular, is the main component in spearmint oil. This spearmint oil looks completely natural on the GC, and it will pass as natural by 99% of any lab that tests it. But we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it's been adulterated. And the reason we know it is by that tiny little peak, okay? The larger peak to the right is the carvone at about 48%. The little bitty peak to the left of that is there at a fraction of a percent, and it's a peak of a nitrogen-containing molecule. That's what we call a synthetic marker peak. And most people will not know what to look for. They will not be able to find this peak because it's not going to be in any GCMS library that you can buy commercially. The only way you can know about it is knowing the chemistry that goes behind making these molecules. And the reason that peak is there is because this particular carvone was made from a process that starts with natural D-limonene from citrus. They take the D-limonene, they react it through a series of reactions with a nitrogen-containing reagent that enables the conversion of D-limonene to L-carvone, which is also found in spearmint. This L-carvone, if you test it at the University of Georgia, have Dr. Culp run that C14 isotope test, will test completely natural. Why? Because it came from natural limonene. It didn't come from a petroleum source. It's only because we know that peak, and that peak occurs in that last step and going from that number 2, I believe, I can't really see it from here, over to the final carvone. There's a slight impurity that goes into a side reaction that leaves this little trace marker behind. This is a lot like CSI, okay? We follow the clues until we figure things out. And lo and behold, based upon our knowledge of the synthesis and how these molecules can be made, we look at a pure sample of L-carvone that's available commercially from China, and look what we find. That little peak. Not present in natural spearmint oil ever. It's a very easy peak to find when you know what to look for because it contains nitrogen, and very few molecules in essential oils contain nitrogen. When you look at the mass spec, there it is. That's the mass spec of this marker peak. Probably nobody's ever seen this in public before. And no one probably will again. So without a question, this spearmint is being used in mass. It's come from synthetic carvone. So this is the kind of thing that we're constantly trying to stay ahead of. This is why I go to not only essential oil conferences, but perfumery conferences and fragrance conferences, because I want to stay ahead of the game on what's commercially available, what things to look for. If you don't do this and you just look at essential oils, you will never know these things. And my background in the perfumery industry is what's enabled me to stay on top of these things. It's an ever-changing game of technology. And the winners are the ones with the best toys and the most knowledgeable experts. And I'm trying to stay on top of that and be that. So you see there, these are the typical tests we do daily. We analyze over 100 samples a week from companies all over the world. This is what we specialize in. That's all we do is look at essential oils. So through GCMS, chiral GCMS, optical rotation, refractive index, specific gravity, carbon-14 isotope test, all these things are necessary to stay on top and get the quality that dōTERRA desires. You can continue to see more about what I'm doing on Facebook, on my Essential Oil University Facebook page at facebook.com/Essential Oil University. We stay on top of debunking the latest myths, to showing you new, unusual oils that are being distilled, to things that I'm distilling in